We are live on Facebook right now,
Okay,
and I would
perfect. Okay.
like to welcome my wonderful guests who come all the way from 6 hours ahead of us in Pakistan and 6 hours behind us, Beth, all the way in Brazil. And we have from the UK, we have Kani, who is sitting in London, and then we have Lebo in Cape Town, and Indileka and I, who are both sitting in Johannesburg. So welcome, wonderful friends. So exciting to have you all here. When you introduce yourself, we do want you to say F is for. For me today, it was freedom, but Kani wanted it, so I'm saying F is for family. And we're going to start,
Okay.
Moniza, with your beautiful poem that your dad had written for us in
Thank you.
Africa.
Thank you. My name is Muniza Hashmi, and I'd just like to first show you the poem that Faiz Ahmad Faiz, the iconic poet from Pakistan, the Urdu poet who is known throughout the world now and translated in several languages. But this was a particular poem that he wrote for the South African freedom movement, and I'll tell you a little history about it later. But Justin, I'd like you to play it, please. It's actually, the title in Urdu is Aa Jao Africa, which means come Africa. Go ahead, Justin.
Okay.
आ जाओ अफ्रीका, आ जाओ, मैंने सुन ली तेरे ढोल की तरंग। आ जाओ, मस्त हो गई मेरे लहू की ताल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, आ जाओ, मैंने धूल से माथा उठा लिया। आ जाओ, मैंने छील दी आंखों से गम की छाल। आ जाओ, मैंने दर्द से बाजू छुड़ा लिया। आ जाओ, मैंने नोच दिया बेकसी का जाल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, पंजे में हथकड़ी की कड़ी बन गई है गुर्ज। गर्दन का तौक तोड़ के ढाली है मैंने ढाल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, जलते हैं हर कछार में भालों के मर्ग नैन। दुश्मन लहू से रात की कालक हुई है लाल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, धरती धड़क रही है मेरे साथ अफ्रीका। दरिया थिरक रहा है तो बन दे रहा है ताल। मैं अफ्रीका हूँ, धार लिया मैंने तेरा रूप। मैं तू हूँ, मेरी चाल है तेरी बब्बर की चाल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, आओ बब्बर की चाल। आ जाओ अफ्रीका, आ जाओ अफ्रीका।
Wow.
Thank you. I remember growing up, as we all do probably, with about listening to what was happening in South Africa. And my father, who would take a lot of his inspiration, he wrote so much for the downtrodden of this world. So when he was listening to, watching, feeling the agony and the pain of the African people, so then he wrote this poem. But the most amazing thing was he never actually traveled to South Africa, I'm told, neither did he meet Mandela. But the most amazing thing was, Firdaus, that when I was there about 8 years ago, if you remember, and we met every time I went there, I had dinner with a young man who was a South African. His name was Hanif Ibrahim. I'm not sure if you know him. And we were having dinner together. And then when I mentioned who I was, he almost fell off the table, but anyway, off the chair. And then he told me that this poem was a poem that these young men used to translate and then read out in their demonstrations and facing the army barricades or the police barricades, and they would just say this poem to give themselves inspiration. And I was very touched by that story, and I thought my dad would be very happy to hear it. So I grew up in that kind of atmosphere because my father was also a Lemon Peace Prize winner. And having what we have suffered in Pakistan, we have had several unfortunate political upheavals, and some of them have been martial laws and armies taking over and stuff like that. So I have grown up in that atmosphere, and I have grown up in a very patriarchal and kind of a misogynist society in which I was made to feel inferior, as I think a lot of us were. And then surprisingly, I did happen to climb up the ladder and headed Pakistan Television, which was one of the public broadcasting. And so I think that was a lot to do with the fact that I was brought up the way I was brought up, and the fact that my mother was British, and she made sure that we never felt that we were anywhere under or below or lesser than the males. We were just two sisters. And so that is where, you and I, Firdaus, clocked in, and then I met Beth also here and there. So I am proud to be here, and for me, F is for female, because that is something that I have always been proud of. I am the proud mother of two sons. I didn't have a daughter, but now I have two granddaughters, and they're beautiful, and I make sure that they actually take their fathers on head on whenever, and they keep saying that, don't talk like that to us. We'll go to grandmother and we'll tell her what you said to us.
Well done.
I'm bringing up two warriors in my house. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been lovely.
So I just want people to know, I met Moniza in 1995 in Australia when we had attended the World Summit on Children's Television, and we have clicked ever since. Moniza is an icon. She's a trailblazer. She's amazing. But I need you to tell them, when you came to South Africa, Moniza, as I told you, is Pakistani. Tell them about your white family in South Africa.
My mother, as I said, is British. And I had three uncles who obviously are British. And two of them settled in South Africa. And one of them was in England, and so on and so forth. And I went looking for them, and Firdaus was very kind and very helpful. And I remember it was just such an amazing experience that I was asked, somebody in the hotel said, madam, there's a visitor for you. And I went down, and there was Helen, my dear, dear cousin, who now lives in Cape Town. And she was there with the husband. And I stood there and I said, okay, this is my family. And I remember we went shopping several times, and we were talking, and that lady there in the shop said, are you friends? And she said, no, we're family. And she looked at us. I mean, I was dressed in my original, Pakistani dress. And I said, it's all right. We're not offended. Don't worry about that. And then we had this grand party in which I had all my nieces and nephews. And one of my niece, wonderful niece, and she turned around and she said, what took you so long to get together? But you see, in those days, we were in Pakistan. The two sisters were in Pakistan. So there was no way that the brothers in South Africa could connect with them in India. It was India at that time, because they were the wrong color. You understand? So because of that, the two brothers and the two sisters were separated. They could only.
So can you imagine? And then they came to South Africa.
Yes.
And so Moniza finds this. And then I visit her in Pakistan, and guess what she makes me take back to Pakistan? Omar Rusks or something like that. I was like, okay, she connected with the white people in South Africa. Indileka, we're going to have you recite from your amazing book, because I want you and Moniza to have this conversation. Imagine you are meeting now on Facebook, not knowing each other, but her father had written this amazing poem for your granddad. And when we introduce Indileka, she's really the first of the first of the first, and she's going to tell us why. So welcome, Indileka. Are you on? Her page looks frozen, Justine.
Yeah,
do you know what's happening? Is she on with us? Okay, it seemed to have gone. Lebu, I was just going to mention, I know this is not your time, but imagine this with all the amazing work you do. I think we need to do a reality TV show with Moniza arriving and finding her British heritage in South Africa.
South Africa.
That is true. And I think what is wonderful about this conversation today is that it is also intergenerational. It is women across the world. It is women of different generations in dialogue with them. I think one of the most important things is how do we harness the space for us to speak across continents, across time zones, and
absolutely.
Also across generations. And
India, are you there? Indileka, are you there? Are you on? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm on. Yes, I'm on, but it kept on cutting and reconnecting. Yeah, but I'm back.
Okay. Are you back? We wanted to.
Yeah.
Can you read for us? Please show them your book. I also put it. I put it on my desk so that
There.
people can see it.
I can see it.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Did you see it? Yes. I was
See,
like, I
yeah,
have to.
yeah, yeah.
I found your book there. Please tell us about your book, your story. Yes.
Okay, for me, let me start with F for me is for femininity. And, you know, my story is a story of a village girl, you know, that grew up in the Eastern Cape, oblivious of the fact that she was Mandela, you know, and that's my point of reference as I was growing up. But around the age of 10, I started knowing that there was this man, iconic man, as they would say, you know, that was in Robben Island. And whenever I would visit my mother in Cape Town, when we would go to Table Mountain, Robben Island would be pointed to me that that in whispers, that's where your grandfather is. And it was only 16 when I met him for the first time in Robben Island through a glass panel window, that size of a small window, like square window, where I could reach. By way of greeting him, I would touch the window and kiss the window. But as I grew older, my grandmother, you know, taught me to be grounded. Evelyn taught me to be grounded. And that's how I brought up. I was brought up to value hard work, because she was one of those no-nonsense women where we all had chores, we all had things to do, and you know, she didn't suffer fools very gladly. I mean, we didn't have, yes, we had friends, but she hated idle gossip and people idling, and we had work all the time from school, you know, from the morning until evening. But then as I grew older, you know, it wasn't until I reached my 40s that I started my spiritual journey, because I'm of the firm belief that, you know, God puts you on earth for a certain purpose. And for a while, that purpose eluded me. And it was 40, I started my spiritual journey just shortly after Uncle Makhato died, you know. And it was mid 40s that I pinned on the real purpose of my life. And that time, that was 2010, when I had just finished a contract work that I was doing. And a friend of mine just, you know, I was fretting. It was a best friend of Pumla, my daughter. They were best friends with this girl, and I had gone to pick her up this one weekend. So this one weekend, she calls me, said, no, the mother wants to speak to you. Ness's mother wants to speak to you. So I go inside, and she asked me, this woman asked me, I did not know Tembeka, but she's one of those gregarious people. And she said to me, what are you doing with your life? And I started fretting that I don't know what to do. I've just lost my job, you know, and I don't know what to do. She looked at me and said, what is your problem? You're the first of the first of the first. That's the day that the penny dropped. And I asked her, what do you mean? He said, you're the first grandchild from the first wife, from the first son. What is your problem? You have a big legacy to live, you know, and being the first child, there's a lot that rests on your shoulders. It is then that the idea of the Thembekile Mandela Foundation was born. A foundation that is very close to my heart, that takes care of the needs of children, health, education, and youth development. But then, you know, what brought me to write my book is whenever I would share snippets of my story on Facebook, because I started being active on social media around 2015. And people will say, but when I'm writing, you know, it seems like you have an interesting story to tell. And I said, look, you know, when you're not ready, you're not ready. It wasn't until 2017, this other friend of mine said, okay, you've been talking about this book for a long time. We need to go and see a publisher. We went and saw a publisher 2018. She gave me, she asked me, what do you want to capture in your book? I said, well, there's lots of things. I just told her my story. I said, okay. I said, I don't know the first thing about writing. She said, okay, I'll give you a skeleton, chapter outline, you know, and then go and write. Went and wrote, and I mean, there's parts of your life where there are difficult places to go to, and I didn't hit sort of a writing block. I just couldn't go to those places. And it wasn't until 2018, no, last year, January, when she said, okay, your deadline is coming close, start writing. And then I started writing. But I want you to read an incept on my book about being a woman in South Africa. I start off the chapter about, explaining the preamble of women's rights in South Africa. And then I talk about how it is about a woman in the 21st century. I then say, for me, I have brought it down to choice, which means living truthfully. I choose to be who I want to be, do what I want, do what I like, and define myself any way I like. And I understand that it is my fundamental right to do so. And some days those choices are struggles I battle with, but they are my own choices. I believe that historically, women have been able to assist each other to gain political and economic freedom, but we have not been able to hold on to each other in gaining the freedom of truth. The truth to be who you want to be, the truth that says that whether we decide to dedicate our lives to our husband and kids or to our career, it is okay. And that, in essence, is what our mothers marched to the union buildings for. The right to choose the kind of life they wanted to live for themselves and for future generations to enjoy, without fear of condemnation or judgment. We need to support each other and be able to live and speak our truth in a safe place among other women. I have realized that at the core, we all have the same needs, to be understood and validated, and that knowledge can leave us vulnerable. Some of us cover vulnerabilities in designer clothing and look down on those who cannot afford it, failing to realize that we are all on a journey to discover and live our own unique truths, failing to understand that this has resulted in us perpetuating a cycle of untruths and being unauthentic around each other. As I write, I begin to appreciate the new struggle for truth we find as women, we as women find ourselves in. I appreciate it because I believe it gives us great opportunities to tell our stories honestly. When I first started believing in my own power and telling another woman my truth, my story, I learned I was winning. I learned I was fearless and I was ready for anything. It is only when we are ready to live in truth that become fearless in speaking it. What then is my truth? My truth is that I too have suffered some of the challenges that most, if not all, South African women face. I will talk about them specifically, all four of them, namely rape, which I have experienced, abuse and violence, both physical and psychological, femicide and toxic masculinity.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I think when I met you in Ndleka, I think it was your honesty, and I think a lot of people have said that, is that even though you are a Mandela, and you said that, you saw Tata when you were 16, but that your truth has always prevailed. And it's that I wanted to share with our audience and with each other. And that I know you will carry us with that truth. So we'll come back to you.
Can I just say one? Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
One, I have traveled extensively across the world, ma'am, but I think one of the most moving times was when I went to Robben Island. I stood in that cell. I took a photograph. I could not believe that this man could have spent his life there. I walked around the quarries. I walked outside. I went and sat on the table because it's a tour. They take you around. It has been one of the most moving memories of my life. And I don't think I can ever forget it. Really.
Wow.
He was a wonderful person. Wonderful man. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Okay.
Thanks, Muniza. So Beth, I'm coming to you and we do have a clip. So what I wanted, Beth, is this amazing woman with the first film, Beth, was of the little boy, the pot and the pan, remember, running through the favelas in Brazil, in Rio. You, like Moniza, you're an icon in terms of media and quality media for children. You are from Latin America. You have opened our eyes to a world that we in Africa would not necessarily see. But for my other guests, just to see, we're talking about Asia, we come into Latin America, we will be in Europe at some point. But this kind of vastness of our continents and our world. And Beth, I have to really champion you. You've been amazing, your strength, your ability, the work that you do. So we'll start with your clip, and then we'd like you to tell us about your work across, because your work, you know, you were at Discovery, you were at in Latin America,
in public TV,
US, yeah. You were everywhere. So I'm going to give you that space. Thank you, Justine. So we'll see Beth's beautiful images. Wow, thank you. Beth, tell us about all this amazing work that you are doing.
Well, it's a pleasure. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you, Firdaus, for the invitation. And my F is, I think, is for family and is for female. And because we are, as Firdaus said, we are a huge family, and we are all part of this passion that is kids and childhood, and we are fighting for having a better childhood in all of the places that we can go. And we've been doing a work inspired by each other, because I've been traveling, and I think now not anymore, because it seems that time is not for travel. But I've been traveling throughout Latin America, and the images that you saw in this video are images of shows that were produced in our region, in Latin American continent. And as you see, we are a mix of people. We have all these influences. We have a lot of Africa inside Brazil, as you know, and we can feel and we can see Africa in our food, in our music, in our dance, in our religion, in our faith. So it's very, very inside us. But of course, even with all this mix, this melting pot, as they would say, that it is our society, we have a lot of racism here, and we've been fighting for, and now at this moment is time for activism in this direction. So we've been part of groups of directors, women directors. They're fighting for representation, and also for kids. We are fighting for the representation in the screen of all kind of kids, all cultures, all colors, all environments, because since the beginning, what we believe that children have to see each other in the screen. This is very important for growing up with health and with a good human perspective. And in all our shows, or the shows that we've been producing, and not only producing, because I run a festival where we usually have workshops for new producers, for new writers, to open up their eyes how important it is representation, not only about gender, but all about culture, about places, about the way you dress, about the way you have relationships with each other. All those things, when they are in the screen, in television, and so many screens that we have today, the children today, since they are born, they have a screen in front of them. And so it's so important to have good examples, to have models, to have standards. And it's a big fight. I would say it's a big fight, because we know we are all colonized, and to have the regional flavor, or regional content, or a regional representation, it takes a lot. So this is part of my work, and I would like to remember a moment when we met, Firdaus, because it was really something that the way we connected. We were at the World Summit. I think it was 1997. I'm not so sure. But then it was in London, and it was the World Summit. And for us, we were questioning, as always, why is this a World Summit? We are not represented. We don't feel represented. And very quick, Latin Americans connected with Africans, which was Firdaus and myself and Claudius and other people. And it would take only 5 minutes for us to be on the stage and to
we were the original disruptors. We disrupted that whole World Summit. We were like, what is this? What's going on here?
And since then, we've been together, and in many different situations. So all the situation where we can find a little space, you know, just to start our speech.
Viva!
We do that. We do that. I was also very thankful to have Firdaus in Brazil more than once. And unfortunately, when you invited me to be in the World Summit, I was a little busy at that time in my TV station.
That was when you were with Lula, and you were the queen of broadcasting. You were very busy.
I was responsible to take this TV and to start everything again. But it was really, one day I will be there.
No, you have to come. You have to come back. Absolutely.
I'm crazy about that. I'm crazy about that.
So Connie, we come to you, and we just moving all over the world, and Connie is going to share with us some beautiful poetry that you've written.
Yes, thank you. I feel like I'm not worthy in this group, but thank you so much for having me. My name's Carnegie, actually the full name. I'm from South Africa originally. I came backpacking to the UK in '96, just, shortly after we were free. I mean, my word today, my F word, is still freedom, because I think having been stuck in in England, I think we're still fighting for a certain type of freedom. You would have heard about George Floyd, obviously. You know, there is racism in this country. I mean, you know, British people struggle with that. When you tell them that there is racism, they don't want to, you know, it's, you know, they're very quick to say it's, well, it's across the Atlantic, it's in America, but, you know, people like myself, we've faced it. It's very insidious. So it's really interesting. So I grew up during apartheid South Africa, and decided to travel in '96. And I was a teacher back home in South Africa. I was teaching English and drama. And then I decided I wanted to see the world. I stopped off in Israel for a little bit, wanted to see Europe, and got stuck because I met my husband here. And then I got into journalism in 2000 after teaching here for a couple of years, because I was really bored. It wasn't the same system as South Africa. The appreciation of education in England was really interesting, whereas in South Africa, in the time that I was teaching there, you know, it was to get an education was a big thing, whereas the contrast with that was challenging. So when I got into journalism, I volunteered for a little bit, and I was working in a local radio station called Radio Berkshire. And then I moved on to the World Service, which I absolutely love. It's, you know, there's languages from all over the world, and I currently present the world's biggest breakfast program on the radio. It's Africa facing, so that's amazing. You know, the fact that I grew up on the continent, you know, puts me at an advantage. But you know, I feel like I've been wrenched from my mother's womb, because I actually never wanted to. I never actually wanted to come here. It wasn't a voluntary act at all. It took me 5 years after coming here. I thought, I'm going to have to accept it. My husband won't go to South Africa. He has an established business here. It was for me to make my life, but I'm a rebel. I still say I'm South African. Everyone at the BBC knows I'm South African, you know. In 2017, actually, I wrote a poem about how I feel every time I leave. So I would love to share it with you, actually. It's called Goodbye, My South Africa. It's quite emotional. I sometimes cry when I read it. I hope I don't today. I was sitting on the runway, and I just had my pen and my notebook, and I left all my emotions onto this page and how I was feeling. So it's Goodbye, My South Africa. And this was in 2017. The end of a runway left behind, and I breathe in the view of uninterrupted green fields and rolling hills of home. Beneath my feet, my gaze misty, fog-like, my birthplace, my home, my country. It's heartbreaking exiting this place. An overwhelming but familiar sadness takes over. From the minute the morning of departure dawns, my heart begs for another week. My mind searches for a quick solution. Contemplation of coming back home triggers a feeling of temporary euphoria. To come back here, to know this place, to feel connected again, to belong. But here I am. My head leans against this bird-like structure, as if seeking comfort from it. My heart breaks as the plane tips its wings against the sea, leaving precious memories behind. It soars with its back turning away from the familiarity of this land. There is no uncertainty in this flight. Its journey is filled with purpose, delivering people to places this machine does not feel, cannot feel the hopelessness of the person it carries. I steal a glimpse of all things remembered, this breathtaking beauty. The beaches, the roads, the rooftops of buildings filled with people I envy, in this place that anchors them. Some necks strain for one last glance, my neck strains. I look into the crystal ball of the past as pictures like a tired film finally sting my eyes, just before the silent tears fall. My head calculates the journey ahead, a sigh escapes my unforgiving self. A sense of helplessness is felt. I surrender to the gentle whir of the engines and look out towards the clouds on the horizon. England is only half my unintentional home. I am incomplete still, living in a self-imposed exile of my heart. This flight, which I longed to be on years before, when my younger eyes looked to the skies and when hope was lifted to journey beyond my home. This flight is all but hopeful in this sad, this repetitive, brief trip. It's only that, a fleeting visit. My soul belongs here. And this aircraft carries a deeply saddened heart back to my adopted country, a place where home is, but where home in my determined heart is only temporary. And this is the emotional line, sorry. Oh, golly. Goodbye, my South Africa, until we meet again. In dreams of the past, where I will walk your streets and meet your people again. I long to wake in your arms, the cradle of my heart. Sorry, that's really emotional.
You've got us all crying right now, my dear. I keep a tissue on the side.
I didn't mean to cry, but it's that emotional. It's the self-imposed exile where it wasn't by choice. And sorry. Having to to experience overt racism and then to come into a country that it practices insidious racism is really difficult. So these 2 weeks have been really hard, and
yes,
yeah, it's really hard. I suppose when I went back home in '97, I was still going through a transition period. I'd look around and I'd go, wow, there's no progression. What do you mean? People are still living in their areas. There's still the Group Areas Act, and that took its time. But, I would have rather have stayed behind and gone through that transition. I know South Africa still struggles with race today, but it's really hard fighting a beast that is almost invisible. And that's exactly what we're doing. And I think, when you describe Europe, it's not vast. And my whole theory 5 years ago was I didn't realize it takes 2.5 hours to go from London to Hungary. And I thought, well, that's like a Durban, Cape Town trip. It takes 2 hours, but this is one continent and there's about 6 countries between. And I thought, how unfair that Europeans describe Africans as being tribal when tribalism is at the very heart of Europe, It is a very tribal space. You have England and Wales and Scotland, sorry, Justine, and people there's a sense here that tribalism is so strong. They hold on to their cultural values and the way in which they live in a tribal sense that is bigger than the tribalism I experienced in South Africa. So I often get angry with that when they define Africa as being tribal. I'm like, tribalism is right here. You actually you can't, and they get offended with that, with the word that they've created, which is really interesting. So yeah, it's been a cathartic week because we've got together with other fellow Black brothers, BAME, Black and Ethnic Minority people, and we've been talking about it. We've been talking about it in a massive sisterhood group within the BBC that is ghost-like. I can't reveal who's in that group, and it's been comforting. So we fought equal pay, or we're still fighting unequal pay. And now we're having to deal with racism. So the battle continues. A luta continua, right?
Yeah.
And isn't that amazing that we sit in all these different countries globally, and that's the connection that we are talking about as women, the issues around gender-based violence, around racism. And so I want to come to you, Lebo, because I want to say you're the youngest maybe in this group when you were talking about intergenerational.
Intergenerational, yes.
We're going to start with a clip from your podcast, and then you go into it, and then after that, I just want to open the conversation. So Justine, we can show Lebo's pod.
Hello and welcome to What's Love, the podcast. This is a podcast series brought to you by Zanga Zungel and in collaboration with the Soul City Institute for Social Justice. Why is this podcast important for you?
Well, I think a lot of people know Soul City as an institute that deals with social and behavior change related to health, and that is still important to us. But we've recently reorganized and reoriented the organization to become an intersectional feminist organization, a social justice institute that is dedicated to women and girls and the societies they live in. So for us, as you said, money is about power, intersectionality is about power, feminism is is about power. And so for us as Soul City, it's very, very important that women begin to understand that money is about power and begin to connect the dots between their power or their powerlessness and their gender identity, and the myriad ways in which women become disempowered through financial issues that they are perhaps not familiar with. For us as Soul City, knowing your rights is the first step to asserting your rights.
Justine,
and
we can start to
is one way for us
fade it
to
out, and then we bring
really important
Lebo
money
in.
and legal matters. And because it is an
okay, Lebo, I want, that's just your introduction, and I want you to tell us about this powerful work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me, and just the flattery of saying I may be the youngest in the group.
I'm not going to say who's the oldest. my darling friend Moniza, I am not saying who's the oldest.
Let me start by saying, for me, F is for fired up. And I think the recent historical events, including, you know, the words of George Floyd, I can't breathe, to the Black Lives Matter across the world, where you saw people, even during a pandemic, going out and showing up in numbers, has fired me up, even in the middle of a pandemic when we should all be self-isolating. Mm-hmm. And it links to what I believe about why I exist. And that is being able to use my voice to speak out about injustice. And from a very young age, I grew up in a very unusual home for a patriarchal setting where, you know, I had a father who nurtured me as a girl and the eldest girl to have my opinion. And for those who understand Setswana, where my surname comes from, Ramafoko means father of the words. And boy, oh boy, do I have words to share. And the very first time I recognized that in a patriarchal society, a woman who owns her words is wrong, was the fact that when I left home where I was nurtured to speak and I went into schooling, everybody commented that I talk too much. As a girl, nobody ever said to me, even as a young girl from a small community of 5,000 households, you'll one day stand at the UN Security Council using your words. You will one day be in front of television using your words. You'll one day stand in front of presidents and leaders and speak your words. And therefore, the medium of television and of radio, and now with new mediums like podcasts, is my political act, is my act. That is a constant reminder that as a young girl, nobody said, oh my goodness, you speak well and you've got a talent and you will speak truth to power. I was told that I speak too much. And what a violence that is when you are born female to in told that you are too much or you do too much of anything. Mm-hmm. And therefore I have taken that rather than as a stone to crush me, but as one that I stand on top of. And I use my voice, and I have for many years on many platforms. And it was actually a great blessing to work for Soul City. I left Soul City at the end of 2019 after having worked at Soul City for 24 years. Soul City, well known as creating one of the first and the largest soap operas that dealt with a number of health and development issues, and created a drama series that was watched by 7 million viewers at one point, a model that has been duplicated across the world, and gender-based violence being one of the topics that it has dealt with. And it enabled me working at Soul City to use my voice and to use it and to speak and advocate. But again, we are sitting at a time in the world where it is still very sad that in only 1 month in South Africa, 21 women were killed by their partners. And that even when our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers had used their voices, have paid with their lives for us to be free, we are still burying young women, the age of 21, the age of 4, the age of 8, being killed by their partners. And I guess every generation has their own path and struggle set before us. And that is why being in this forum and talking to other women across the continent, we need to be joining our voices to speak about injustice. And I will keep quiet the day I no longer exist.
Yes. Justine, do we have that last clip that I wanted us to show on the GBV? Let's look at this, everybody, and then I'd like Moniza to start when it's done. Okay.
Here, South Africa has been grappling with a gender-based violence crisis.
All right, to South Africa now, where activists are protesting a new wave of violence against women. Several women were recently raped and brutally murdered there. The killings have sparked nationwide outrage and led to growing calls for change.
It's with the heaviest of hearts that I stand before the women and the girls of South Africa this evening to talk about another pandemic that is raging in our country. The killing of women and children by the men of our country.
Thank you, Justine. So I wanted us to look at this clip, especially Lebo, bringing you, leading exactly what you were saying. And as we consider, Moniza, I think in terms of where you sit in Asia, where we sit in Africa, where Beth sits in Latin America, the issue around gender-based violence has permeated our lives. It's probably, as I was teasing you being the oldest, I'm sure there's so much you can share because you've been at the forefront. I remember going into conferences where you were so vocal, so clear, so articulate around these issues. And I want you to share something here now, having seen that at least our president stood up in this lockdown. We're talking about another pandemic, as they are in the US around Black Lives Matter, as you are doing, Carnegie, in the UK. So I think, Moniza, if you would just share something there.
I think, if I may say so, it's one of the most tragic and very, very sad things that these incidents are also happening terribly in Pakistan. This is not just the pandemics, and it has become something which has almost become, I hate to say the word, acceptable, when young girls about 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, who are, shall I say, to some extent almost bought as domestic labor, you know, their families are so poor, so they get their salaries for a year, so they are kind of hostage for 1 year with some people, and then they are so badly treated. Some of them actually die because of that violence. And I'm very proud of the fact also, I'm very satisfied. I work with an NGO which is called KASHF, K-A-S-H-F. And we are doing television serials. Another one is just under production now, which is on human trafficking. And we are doing serials and we are doing media work in which we're trying to promote as much as we can awareness through these radio programs, television programs, and so on and so forth. But you know, Firdaus and all my friends here, I don't know how long it's going to take. If I say that in my years that I have been with the media, 40, 50 years almost, has there been a change? Possibly, yes, the awareness is there, but somehow the cases don't seem to be showing that. The data doesn't show that. And even though the awareness is there and there is a kind of a condemnation from at all levels, even then there are terrible, terrible abuses that we see with what is happening with young girls and boys. Let me put you that. Yes, unfortunately, yes. That even the boys are terribly mistreated, and these are in religious seminaries and so on and so forth. So the cases remain, and the cases will continue, I feel. This is despite the fact that the education index is going up, girls are being more educated, schools are coming up, and so on and so forth. But I think this is going to take certainly more than my lifetime to see a change in which we will feel that, I can say that there has been a change.
Induleka, you so bravely shared with us in your opening about the things you were looking at. And one of it you mentioned in there is rape. And you have been extremely vocal yourself about personal experiences, but you are an activist as well. What do you think that it's going to be another lifetime?
You know, I think until we start as humanity, both men and women, to stop treating gender-based violence piecemeal, because we only talk about it when it raises its ugly head. It is not our everyday conversation, for instance, and we only look at it symptomatically. As a nurse, I believe that to cure any disease, you need to go to the root cause, and we haven't dug deep of what is the cause. And until we do that, we will never be able to even bring the stats down and eradicate it, because we haven't delved deep. What is the basis? What is underpinning gender-based violence? Because it's not only done by men. There are women that abuse men. It's across the genders. So what is the cause? What has gone wrong in the moral fiber of society that we see more of this coming out, and we see the brutality and the frequency? I mean, like you said, in this past month, since the alcohol ban was lifted in South Africa, it has skyrocketed. You know, could it be alcohol? What is the underpinning cause? Could it be the affluence of women into positions that's frustrating men that are not growing with equal proportion? Because what we've done as society, specifically in South Africa, is that we have emancipated the girl child, leaving the boy child behind. And therein is a problem. We cannot, who do we expect these girls to marry? Because we've elevated, there's take a girl child to school. Yes, I understand that it was to capacitate women, girl children, because they have always been left behind. But what we've done is that we've created a skewed society. And until the day that we start talking about the underlying cause of what is causing it, to get to the root problem of it, we'll never be able to eradicate it.
Lebo?
Firdaus, can I come in here?
Yes, please.
Yes.
I do think that we know what the root causes are. And I think the intersection between race, power, and capitalism is what that intersection is important, because the intersection between race and capitalism pits people to compete for different things. So one of the things that you are seeing, and it's not a surprise, I did a lot of shows before the lockdown about what is going to happen. Capitalism and the history of migration in South Africa, if you read it, created a number of things, and it was supported by things like religion and culture. They actually said the economy is supported by men leaving homes and doing work, and in a racialized society, they were doing work that had to take them away from home. And the work of looking after homes, looking after children, was then regarded in a capitalist system as unpaid labor. And therefore, that is why even right now, I think it was Kani who spoke, we are still having people today who are fighting for equal pay for equal work. It is because historically, we said the capitalist system, I mean, colonization was founded within capitalism, where you needed to extract resources from some part of the world to build another part of the world in a very racialized manner. And there is no power in Africa
that has radically shifted how the economic and the racial imbalances. Why are we sitting in South Africa in the lockdown? And in fact, the reason why we had to open up the economy or even make alcohol available had nothing to do with health. It had something to do with the commercial determinants of health.
Yes.
So we are in a moment in history where, you know, we need to name who are the big influencers. Because even the fact that it would be a problem to empower girls and not empower women, and not empower men in a society that does not recognize that even that empowerment happens within an economic and a racial system that is unequal. Capitalism thrives when a few have plenty. How did we become the most unequal society in the world? You know, and the more unequal society are, is the more you find this thriving. So we need to also, as we are saying, what are the local solutions? We also need to say, how are we sitting with corruption and looting in African countries? You know, it's not only as Black people who are stealing, it's the way the capitalist world is set up about power and money being concentrated in the hands of the few.
Connie, I'd like to hear from you, because I know that you had spoken about, as Lebu just said, you were talking about equal work, equal pay. And when you think about the UK and you think about, oh my goodness, they're supposed to be at another level, yet you're still having those fights.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the fight for unequal, we call it unequal pay because, you know, we haven't resolved that situation, continues. But it's really interesting when you're trying to ask for a seat at the table, the pushback that you get, you know, I mean, even within institutions, if you wanted to, you know, just get equal work. So you're doing the same work as a man. We asked for transparency as well, you know, at the BBC. And we got some of it, but we still have a long way to go. But it's you know, the thing that I wanted to compare this with is when you're in the UK, you get an awareness amongst men that women are equal, you know, equal to them in terms of the way they respect you. But the minute I step off that flight in South Africa, and if I'm sitting in a lounge or having a meal, the attitudes that men have, you know, men still sit separately from women, or they'll go outside for a smoke. It's these tiny, it's the smaller things that, the smaller things that sort of influence sexism. So how are we bringing up our boys back home? You know, our mothers still fawning over them, because I know my mum certainly does that with her children, or her boys, her sons or her boys. The simple things that need fixing within the South African context. And
so I think, So I think what we're saying, and that was, we've got 1 minute in which I'm going to end this. Can you believe an hour has gone by? I think what we're saying, thank you, Connie, is also, Beth, unfortunately, her internet went off, but I think Beth's images and the work that she's doing around how do we give the right images to our children. And for all of us as we sit here, because we're all working in media at some point or the other, and in your case, in Ndileka, you also work with young people and your own NGO that you have, is how do we get the children, the young people to change? Because it's behavior change. It's not going to happen with the older people. We long gone past that. And our work, I think, is with young people. And that's where I'd like us to continue. But we've come to the end of the program, everybody. And I really want to thank you, Moniza, for staying awake with us. And I want to thank you all, Connie. You got me there. I think we all choked up with your beauty. You have to come back home. But you also have to make the UK your home, because your daughter is there. And that has to be, she has to be happy about home. Ndileka, I loved what you shared so generously, as you always do. And Lebo, you know we want you for your fired up. So thank you for being all fiery. I want to thank everybody. Our show goes out.
Thank you.
And please join us. The next one is on Pan-Africanism. And I think that's going to be quite fun. And thereafter, we're going to talk about whiteness. So if any of you people would like to be part of whiteness, do let me know. Thank you and good night, everybody. Bye.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.